Several months ago now, Noni Lasso, then interim dean, invited me to give a talk at this convocation, and she said, oh, you could give a brief review of education research and how it's contributed to the betterment of people's lives. And she might wish tomorrow morning that I had followed that suggestion. But I think it has been undercut by recent events. A couple of issues. First of all, the urgency of addressing the challenges to education, to the academy that are facing us. And second, if you take the last few months into account, it's really hard to argue that the world is getting better. So I'm faced with a little bit of a challenge. What message can I formulate here that does not taint what should be a day of joy and pride for all of the graduates and for their families and for those of us on the faculty who've helped push them along, while ignoring what's going on in the world. I don't know quite how to do that, how to make that challenge. The joy should be real, and you should feel it and experience it. But I recognize that many of you are also dealing with uncertainty and with confusion about your futures and dismay at the prospect of sudden changes in your plans. And we have to acknowledge that reality as well. I think I've come to realize now how naive we've been to assume that the values that Harvard stands for are widely shared, that producing life-enhancing and life-saving research was enough to justify our existence, that the undeniable benefits of constituting a student body that is heterogeneous, I think that's a word we can still use, heterogeneous in national origins, in ethnicity, in language, in culture and experience, that those benefits would be obvious to all. It seems, though, that we have failed somehow to communicate our strongest commitment and deepest values in ways that make sense to many of our fellow citizens. And that is our failure. Perhaps our focus on performative actions, on pronouns and anti-racist workshops and diversity slogans has masked the degree to which those performances represent, however inadequately, deep commitments to shared values, to an effort to create a world in which words like marginalized and minoritized are no longer necessary, and in which diversity is valued for its undeniable contributions to a group's effective functioning and to individuals' critical thinking. And that those inherent values are far more important, should be emphasized far more than the utility of heterogeneity in raising our scores on some external metric of institutional climate. So today, I offer you, the graduates, not just my congratulations, but also my admiration. You are entering a less welcoming and more challenging world than I faced when I finished my graduate training in, listen carefully, you might not believe it, 1971. Those of us born in the US just after the Second World War could well be called the multiply blessed generation, I think. The country had emerged from a debilitating depression, from a devastating world war, and everyone was ready to settle down to world peace and domestic tranquility. And we did, to a large extent. The facts confirm that various aspects of society were indeed getting steadily better in those post-war years. Poverty continued to exist, but economic options were expanding, wages were rising. Folks continued to complain that kids weren't learning to read well enough, but schooling was universally available, and access to higher education was vastly more accessible than it previously had been. Racism was far from ended, as we have heard from Emmanuel, but the civil rights movement generated legislative initiatives that led to advancements in access to voting, to employment, to schooling, and perhaps most importantly, to changes in people's beliefs. I certainly don't mean to suggest, I'm not naive, I don't mean to suggest that everything was wonderful. Sexist policies and attitudes persisted, unquestioned. Racism and anti-Semitism were tolerated. The New Deal and the Great Society, to the contrary, notwithstanding, poverty continued, as did severe inequities in access to good schools, to decent health care, and to safe employment. The Cold War loomed over us, the blessed generation. We weren't participating in drills to prepare us for school shootings, but we did practice crouching under our desks in case of a nuclear attack, a practice that even in third grade we understood was going to be completely ineffective if an atom bomb went off. So despite all the failings of that era, there was, and I think this is most important, a general sense of optimism, a sense that things were getting better, that the future was secure. And that phenomenon was not limited to the US. In Europe, in the post-war years, with the stimulus of the Marshall Plan, but also the reasonable policies of Western European countries around social welfare and access to schooling and health care and elder care, people's lives really did get better. China, too, after emerging from the rigidities of the planned economy, started in about 1978 to adopt a mixed economy that allowed for foreign investment and private enterprise, but very importantly, used the surplus generated by that new mixed economy to ensure early childhood education was accessible to children in the most remote regions of the country, to ensure that university access would be increased, and to use education as a way of revitalizing shrinking rural population centers. Vietnam, after the merciful end of the American War, focused on developing a national literacy curriculum and national literacy assessment program, which improved literacy rates from close to zero for most of the population to essential universal literacy by now. At the same time, economic factors reflected that increase in literacy and education. In 1990, 80% of the Vietnamese population was living in poverty, and in 2018, that had declined to 8%, not unrelated to the educational advances. In Latin America, Brazil and Uruguay and Chile have had somewhat up and down economic histories, but certainly have, over that entire period, seen impressive economic growth. And in every case, the expansion of economic opportunities in those countries was powered by improvements in educational access and quality. through undertakings often led or shaped by graduates of HGSE. So there have been improvements not just in the quality of life, not just in the US, but around the world, and that is a wonderful boon to us at Harvard because it means that students from all over the world are now prepared educationally and financially to come join us here to expand our horizons and share their perspectives with us. I would argue, though I've been talking about prosperity, you might think I've been hanging out with economists for the last couple of days, that the growing prosperity is really not the major feature of that period in our history. I would say that optimism was. Things were not just getting better, they were experienced as getting better. Were they perfect? Of course not. Politicians cheated and profited from their positions of power as they do now, although they did at least attempt to cover up the lapses. And they had the decency to be embarrassed about them when caught. Leaders lied to us, but they could get called out on their lies because there was a shared recognition of the difference between truth and fantasy, rather than a widespread participation in fiction reinforcement procedures. Anti-Semitism existed, but it could still be distinguished from legitimate criticism of Israeli government policies. Party politics could be vicious, but even no matter what they said in public, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate ate lunch together and played squash together and attended each other's birthday parties. Scientific misconduct existed, but it was not seen as an excuse to demolish entire structures focused on improving health or education outcomes. In other words, there was a general presupposition of goodwill that licensed disagreements and kept them civil. Losing that presupposition of goodwill may be a greater threat to our well-being as a country and as a set of national societies than tariff-induced economic downturn or an unprecedented increase in the national debt. So as you go out into the world with your Harvard degrees, you might have to contend with the possibility that reality-based, fact-informed, truth-valuing culture that is characteristic of our lives here is not universal. And perhaps even that your credibility is suspect simply because of your association with an elite institution. Crimson journalist Miles Herzenhorn co-authored an op-ed in today's New York Times celebrating the new unity at Harvard across the university, across political and religious and ethnic lines. A unity which he argued was promoted and gendered by the outside attacks on the institution. But one wonders why the conversations that led to that unity, to the co-presence of pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel activists on the same stage talking about the same issues, why that conversation was not going on before the threat was mounted. I would hope that we have all learned here at HGSE how to anticipate the need for conversations across division, how to discuss important issues civilly with those we disagree with. And I hope you've learned to defend the principles that we espouse here while listening to and learning from adherents of different principles. As Noni mentioned, I've been involved for over 20 years in developing elementary and middle school curricula that were designed to teach adolescents the skills of debate and argumentation, skills which require sophisticated oral language and literacy accomplishments, but they also require respect for facts and respect for one's opponent. Argumentation is ultimately the process of embracing disparate propositions as opportunities to learn. How can anyone think that? Well, that's a question we will never be able to answer unless we bother to ask them and to listen to their answers. Such conversations are undeniably difficult. They require skills that we too rarely teach young students, or for that matter, older students. They are difficult because they create paralyzing dilemmas. Is the point of such discussions making our own thinking clear, or letting others make their thinking clear to us? Should we be trying to persuade people or understand them? What is the right balance between courtesy and candor, between freedom of speech and avoidance of harm, between commitment to our own values and premature rejection of others' values, between disagreement and disagreeability? I invite you all to take these dilemmas home and discuss them with one another. But these dilemmas, by definition, are irresolvable. Problems can be solved. Dilemmas can only be reasoned about. Howard Gardner said somewhere, if we want to have good workers and good citizens, this is part of his good work project, we need to create common spaces in which individuals can talk about the moral and ethical dilemmas they have faced and how they resolve them. And of course, I agree. No one would disagree with Howard Gardner. But common spaces are not enough. We need to nurture the skills to talk to one another in those common spaces and the presupposition of goodwill that allows for both candor and ardor, that invites disagreement and a willingness to admit uncertainty, and that helps each of us inch toward the ability to listen to those whose perspectives are most distant from our own. So go out into the world, proud of your achievements, ready to exploit them, ready to use them to get a job with any luck. Go out as well prepared to defend this institution against mendacious attacks and gratuitous insults. HGSE's motto, you've heard several times today, learn to change the world. Note that, it's change the world, not change the USA, not change Cambridge, not change Massachusetts. You are here because we need you, your skills, your commitment, your willingness to speak up, the knowledge you have brought with us from your own corners of the world, and your courageous candor if the world is going to change for the better. Thank you.